The sun hadn't even burned the morning mist off the water when I realized my peaceful Saturday was about to be anything but. I had my coffee in one hand, my fishing gear in the other, and the quiet expectation of a day spent alone with the lake. But when I rounded the bend in the gravel road leading to my favorite launch spot, there she was. Karen. Not just a Karen, the one everyone in the area warned newcomers about. She stood with her hands on her hips, sunglasses perched high on her head like some sort of crown, and her SUV parked diagonally across the entire ramp. Her stance said she wasn't just parking there, she was staking a claim. And judging by the smug little smirk on her face, she thought I was about to turn tail and find another place to fish. She didn't know me very well. I eased my truck forward until I was close enough to see her lips tighten. She turned her head just slightly, like she was pretending not to notice me. I rolled down my window. "Morning," I called, trying to keep my tone light. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she made a big show of sipping her iced coffee and then finally said, "You'll have to come back later. I'm having friends over for a picnic and we're using the dock." The dock? My dock? Well, technically it belonged to the town, but I'd been fishing there since I was a kid. I knew every nail in those planks, every spot where the boards creaked underfoot. And in all those years, no one had ever tried to claim it like it was their backyard barbecue pit. I glanced at my watch, 6:32 a.m. Who has a picnic at sunrise? My gut told me this wasn't about a picnic at all. Karen just didn't like the idea of anyone else using the lake while she was around. And that smug expression, it wasn't going anywhere unless I did something about it. I put the truck in park and stepped out, feeling her eyes follow me like she was waiting for me to argue. "You can't launch here today," she said, as if she were the harbor master. I smiled, one of those slow, deliberate smiles that usually makes people nervous. "We'll see about that." She laughed, a short, sharp sound. I said no. Now here's the thing about fishing, it's not just a hobby for me, it's a ritual. My father taught me how to tie a lure here. My grandfather told me his best stories while we sat on that dock. And the idea of letting some self-appointed lake sheriff block me from a place filled with that kind of history, not a chance. I walked back to my truck, Karen's voice trailing behind me. "If you try, I'll call the police," she warned. That's when I realized she had no idea how stubborn I could be. She thought she'd already won. But while she was busy texting whoever would listen, I was already planning exactly how I was going to put my boat in that water with or without her permission. If Karen thought a warning about calling the police was enough to send me packing, she had another thing coming. I've dealt with angry weather, busted motors, and hooks buried so deep in my thumb that I had to cut the barb out with pliers. A woman with a caffeine buzz and a bad attitude, that was just a minor inconvenience. She stood there like she was the gatekeeper of the entire lake, but I could tell she was waiting for me to brake first. Her SUV was angled just enough to block the concrete ramp, but not the gravel shoreline to the right. I'd used that narrow patch once before when the dock was being repaired. The slope was steeper and the water line was a little rocky, but it was more than enough to get my boat in if I played it right. I pretended to be checking something in my truck bed just to keep her guessing. She shouted across the ramp, "Did you hear me? This is my spot today." That word, "my," hit me like a fishhook to the ear. This wasn't her spot. She didn't build it, maintain it, or even pay to use it. But she had planted her SUV there like it was a flag on conquered territory. I decided to bait her, the way you do a stubborn catfish. "You know," I called back, "there's enough room for both of us. I'll be gone before you even finish your sunrise picnic." Her sunglasses flashed in the morning light as she shook her head. "Not happening, you'll scare away the fish for my friends." That one almost made me laugh out loud. As if a bunch of people sitting on folding chairs eating potato salad at 6 in the morning were going to be silently communing with nature. The longer I looked at her SUV blocking that ramp, the more I realized she wasn't doing this because she wanted the dock. She was doing it because she wanted control. Some people get a taste of authority, even fake authority, and it goes to their head. Karen was drunk on the idea that she could tell someone what to do and make it stick. So I did what any decent fisherman would do when the water's choppy. I adjusted my course. I walked to the shoreline, boots crunching on the gravel, and started sizing up the angle. She watched me suspiciously. "What are you doing?" she called. "Just checking the view," I replied. The truth was, I was mentally measuring every inch between my truck's back tires and the water. If I timed it right, I could reverse down that slope without even touching the main ramp. My boat would be in the lake before Karen even realized she'd lost. But I also knew the element of surprise would be key. If she guessed what I was doing too soon, she might try to physically block me. And if that happened, things could get messy. My goal wasn't to start a scene, my goal was to fish. I walked back to my truck and leaned against the door, sipping the last of my coffee. The air was warming now, the mist starting to lift off the lake. Somewhere out there, I imagined the bass just under the surface, waiting for me, waiting for the sound of my lure breaking the stillness. And no matter how long Karen stood there glaring at me, I knew one thing for certain before the morning was over: that sound was going to happen. The moment she realized I wasn't leaving, her posture changed. The smug lean against the SUV door was gone. Now she stood upright, one foot slightly forward, like she was ready to plant herself in my path. Her sunglasses came off, revealing a pair of eyes that had the sharp, territorial glint of a gull defending its nest. "Look," she started, her voice louder than before, "I told you this isn't happening. You either find another launch or you're gonna have a problem." That last part, "you're gonna have a problem," sounded almost rehearsed, like she'd been waiting to say it all morning. Maybe she'd used that line before and it had worked on other people. The thing is, I'm not other people. I leaned on my truck door and smiled in that slow, infuriating way that makes someone feel like you're 2 moves ahead in a game they didn't even realize they were playing. "Karen," I said, letting her name hang in the air like bait on a line, "the only problem here is that the fish are getting hungrier by the minute." She crossed her arms. "You think you can just do whatever you want?" "I think," I replied, "this lake is for everyone, and I'm not going to let one parked SUV change that." She stepped forward then, closing the gap between us, her shadow stretching across the gravel. "If you so much as back that trailer down here, I'll stand in your way. You want a scene? I'll give you one." Her voice had that edge, not the sharp, dangerous kind, but the brittle one that cracks when pushed just a little harder. I could feel we were 1 or 2 sentences away from her yelling loud enough to wake the entire lakeshore. That's when I decided to stop talking. Talking would only give her more ground to argue. Instead, I walked to the back of my truck and started undoing the straps on my boat, the quiet clink of metal buckles carrying across the water. Each click seemed to make her twitch. "You're wasting your time," she said, though her voice had lost a bit of its bite. "I'm not moving." I didn't even look up. My hands worked methodically, muscle memory taking over. The sun was higher now, glinting off the aluminum hull, and I could almost feel the cool lake air rushing past once I was out on the open water. Behind me, her footsteps shifted in the gravel. I knew she was watching every move, trying to figure out if I'd really go through with it. And the truth was, I was more than ready. The slope to the right of the ramp was rough, sure, but I'd launched in worse spots. All I needed was the right moment. That moment came when she pulled out her phone, likely to record whatever evidence she thought she'd need to make herself the victim in this little standoff. While her gaze dropped to the screen, I climbed into the driver's seat, turned the key, and let the engine rumble to life. Her head snapped up. "What are you?" she started, but I was already shifting into reverse, my eyes on the narrow strip of gravel that would take me and my boat straight to the water. The truck eased backward, tires crunching over the uneven gravel. The trailer rattled behind me, each jolt a reminder that this was going to be a rough launch, but it was happening. I could see the shimmer of the lake in my mirrors now, the sunlight breaking into 1,000 diamonds on the surface. Every foot I reversed was another foot closer to winning this silent battle. Karen's voice rose behind me, sharp and frantic. "Stop, I'm telling you to stop." But I didn't stop. I kept my speed steady, careful enough not to jackknife the trailer, firm enough to show I wasn't bluffing. Her footsteps scuffed against the ground as she moved toward the slope, hovering near the edge as if she might throw herself in front of my truck. I tapped the brake, not for her sake, but to adjust my angle. The rocky shoreline slanted more than I remembered, and I'd have to back in with precision if I didn't want to dent the propeller before the boat even hit the water. From the corner of my eye, I saw her packing, her phone still in hand, recording every second. "Are you insane?" she yelled. "You can't do this, it's dangerous." I glanced out the window, meeting her gaze for the briefest moment. Dangerous is letting someone think they can own the public lake. The rear tires hit a patch of soft earth and I felt the trailer begin to tilt. Perfect. Another few feet and the boat would be floating free. The smell of the water hit me, earthy and cool, mixing with the faint metallic tang of the outboard motor. My hands tightened on the wheel. That's when she stepped closer, just a little too close for comfort. "If you hit me, you'll regret it," she snapped. Her words barely registered over the sound of the trailer's tires hitting the wet edge of the lake. The boat rocked gently as the stern kissed the water. I could see the ripples spreading out, disturbing the glassy surface. The fish would scatter for a few minutes, sure, but they'd be back. They always came back. She hovered near the fender of the trailer now, phone aimed at me like a weapon. "I'm calling the police," she declared. I smiled faintly, unhooked the winch, and gave the bow a shove. The boat slid off the bunks with a smooth, satisfying splash, settling into the water as if it belonged there more than anywhere else. Karen froze, her mouth still half open mid-argument. For a second, she just stared at the boat drifting a few feet from the shore, her reflection rippling beside it. I stepped out of the cab, the crunch of gravel under my boots breaking the silence between us. "You're not supposed to," she started again, but the words were weaker now, less certain. "I just did," I said simply, walking past her toward the dock. For the first time all morning, the wind shifted, carrying with it the sound of water lapping gently against the hull. It was the sound I'd been waiting for, the sound of victory. The boat bobbed gently in the water, rocking like it was welcoming me back. I climbed aboard, the boards creaking under my weight, and untied the rope from the dock post. The air over the lake was cooler, cleaner, the kind that feels like it cuts through every layer of stress you've been carrying. Out here, it was just me, the water, and the quiet hum of possibility. Behind me, Karen was still at the water's edge, her phone out, the screen angled toward me. She shouted something I couldn't quite catch over the soft slap of waves against the hull. I didn't need to hear her words to know the tone. It was the same brittle outrage she'd started with, only now there was something else in it. The thin thread of frustration that comes when you realize you've lost. I lowered the motor, the splash of the prop cutting into the lake making her flinch as if I'd just crossed some invisible line. She stepped back, finally off the ramp and onto the gravel, muttering under her breath. I turned the key and the outboard sputtered, coughed, then roared to life. That sound, sharp and mechanical, cut through the last of her control like a knife. "You can't just ignore me," she shouted over the motor. I looked at her just long enough for her to see the calm in my face, then shifted into gear. The boat glided forward, the wake spreading behind me like a ribbon of defiance. The lake opened up ahead, the shoreline falling away on either side. Out here, the sunlight danced in patterns on the surface, hiding the shadows where I knew the fish would be waiting. I steered toward the deeper channel, the motor's hum blending with the low call of a loon somewhere in the distance. But even as the dock shrank behind me, I could still picture her standing there with her phone, probably rehearsing how she'd spin the story to make herself the hero. Maybe she'd claim I'd been aggressive. Maybe she'd say I'd endangered her. It didn't matter. Out here, her voice couldn't reach me. Out here, the only rules were the ones the water made. I killed the engine a few hundred yards out and let the boat drift, the ripples carrying me toward my first cast of the day. My hand found the familiar weight of my rod, the reel smooth under my thumb. The line whispered out over the water, the lure landing with a soft plunk. The stillness after that sound was pure magic. For the first time all morning, I let my mind settle. This was why I came here, not for the fight, not for the standoff, but for this exact moment of silence between man and lake. But somewhere deep down, I knew the morning wasn't over. Karen didn't seem like the type to just let things go. And something told me before the day was done, she'd find a way to make herself my problem again. I'd been on the water maybe 20 minutes, drifting along the quiet edge of the channel when I heard it, a faint, distant hum that didn't belong. It wasn't the wind or the slap of small waves against the hull. This was mechanical, steady, and getting louder. I reeled in slowly, eyes scanning the tree-lined shore until I spotted the glint of sunlight off metal. My stomach tightened. There she was, Karen in a rented pontoon boat cutting across the lake like she was leading a search and rescue mission. Only there was no rescue, just her, alone at the wheel, squinting into the morning light as she headed straight for me. I couldn't help but laugh under my breath. Most people, after losing a little power play, would lick their wounds and move on. Not Karen. No, she was doubling down. The pontoon's motor growled as she drew closer, leaving a wide, foamy wake behind her. When she was within shouting distance, she killed the engine, letting the boat drift into range. Her voice carried over the water, sharp and insistent. "You think you can just ignore me?" I set my rod down, leaning casually against the side of my boat. "I thought that's what you wanted me out here, away from your picnic spot." She ignored the jab, her hands tightening on the pontoon's rail. "I told you the police are on their way. You need to come back to shore now." I tilted my head, and do what exactly? Apologize for using the lake. Her mouth worked like she had a dozen things to say but couldn't pick which one would sting the most. The pause stretched long enough for a dragonfly to skim the surface between our boats. Finally, she jabbed a finger toward me. You're trespassing? I couldn't stop the smirk. On public water. The way her face tightened told me she knew her argument didn't hold water, literally. But she wasn't here for logic. She was here to win something, anything, even if it was just making me uncomfortable enough to leave. That's when she reached down and pulled something from under the bench seat, a long metal pole with a hook at the end. My eyes narrowed. I'd seen those before, dock push poles used to maneuver boats in shallow water. She held it like it was a sheriff's baton. You need to move, she said, her voice low now, more controlled, or I'll move you. I straightened, meeting her stare. The space between our boats felt smaller than it was, the air heavy with the kind of tension that comes right before something breaks. For a long second, neither of us moved. Then I reached down, my fingers brushing the cool aluminum of my own push pole. I didn't raise it, not yet, but I made sure she saw it. Her eyes flicked down, then back up to mine, and something in her expression shifted. This wasn't just about a fishing spot anymore. It was about who would back down first. The lake was so still in that moment that I could hear the water dripping from the tip of her push pole. We were locked there, two boats floating a dozen feet apart, the air between us taut as a fishing line stretched to breaking. Karen was the first to move. She shoved the pole down into the water and gave her pontoon a hard push, closing the gap between us with each slow glide. Her face was tight, determined, the kind of look that says she's not leaving until she's convinced she's made her point, whatever that point actually was. You can't just take over the lake, she said, as if repeating it enough would make it true. And you can't just invent rules because you don't like someone, I replied, keeping my voice calm. The calmer I sounded, the more her jaw clenched. She drifted closer until the bow of her pontoon was barely a few yards from my stern. The push pole tapped against the side of my boat, not hard, but enough to make it clear she was willing to make contact. Move, she said again, her voice quieter now, like it was less about intimidation and more about testing if I'd flinch. I didn't. Instead, I reached down, reeled in my line, and set the rod neatly across the seat. My movements were deliberate, unhurried, the kind of thing you do when you want the other person to realize they're not in control of your pace. Her eyes darted toward my hands, then back to my face. I could almost see the frustration simmering under her skin. She gave her pontoon another shove, the nose nudging closer. You're asking for trouble, she said. I finally stood, bracing one hand on the side of my boat, leaning forward just enough to close the verbal distance between us. No, Karen, I said, my voice low. I'm asking for you to let me fish in peace. Something in my tone must have hit a nerve because she pulled her pole back sharply and sat down, gripping the wheel with both hands. The pontoon's motor coughed to life, breaking the tense stillness. She didn't floor it right away, she just sat there, engine idling, staring at me like she was deciding whether to escalate or retreat. Then, without a word, she spun the wheel, the pontoon swinging in a wide arc. The wake rolled toward me, rocking my boat, but I stayed planted, one hand resting on the rail. I watched as she powered away, heading back toward the dock. It should have felt like a victory, but the way she left so suddenly made something in my gut tighten. This wasn't over. Karen didn't strike me as the kind of person who accepted defeat quietly, and if she was heading back to shore, she was heading there with a plan. I stayed out on the water, casting into the shaded drop-offs and letting the lake settle after the ripples from her wake faded. The bass had started biting, and for a while I let myself forget about Karen entirely. But after an hour, curiosity got the better of me. I glanced toward the dock. Her SUV was still there, parked at the same arrogant angle across the ramp, but now there was movement. Karen was back on the dock, packing with her phone pressed to her ear, her voice carrying faintly over the water. Even from a distance, I could hear the agitated tone, the sharp gestures. Whoever was on the other end of that call was getting the full Karen treatment. I reeled in and watched. She kept looking toward me, then toward the parking lot, then back toward the water. That's when I noticed something. The waterline had crept higher on the ramp. The tide, or rather, the rising water from the lake's dam release, was coming in fast, and her SUV's rear tires were already touching the edge of the wet concrete. I felt the corners of my mouth turn up. She parked so close to the lake to block me that she'd left no buffer for the water's rise. And in another 15 minutes, she wasn't going to have a blocked ramp anymore, she was going to have a half-submerged SUV. Sure enough, as I drifted closer, pretending to be headed back in, the water began to lap over the back tires. She noticed it at the same moment. Her free hand flew to her head, clutching at her hair as if that would stop the water. She ended her call abruptly and sprinted toward the driver's side. The tires spun in place, spraying muddy water. The lake wasn't letting go that easily. For the next several minutes, I watched her try everything, rocking the SUV back and forth, revving the engine, even shouting for help to people who weren't there. The water kept rising. The more she fought, the more the lake claimed what it was owed. I finally pulled up alongside the dock, my boat bumping gently against the boards. She shot me a desperate look, the kind of look people give when they need something but hate that they have to ask. "Can you help me?" she said, her voice tight. I looked from her to the SUV, now with water halfway up the rear doors, and then back to her. "Corrend," I said slowly, "this is a public dock. Anyone can use it, even the water." Her jaw dropped, but I was already pulling away, the motor humming as I headed for deeper water. Behind me, the sound of her spinning tires faded, replaced by the steady lap of waves. Out here, the air was calm again, the sun warm on my shoulders. The lake had delivered its own kind of justice. And as I cast my line once more, I thought about how some battles don't need yelling or threats or even pushing back. Sometimes you just let nature handle it. And when it does, you can focus on the important things like the tug of a fish on your line and the quiet satisfaction of knowing you didn't just win. You let the lake win for you.